So Steve Watkins, I've been involved with IT governance since pretty much its inception. Worked with Alan prior to IT governance, and as some of you may well know, the company came about through a book that we wrote. There's two. I'm going to keep this relatively short, but it's two leaps of faith I'm going to ask for. Just follow me with this. So Alan and I were responsible for the first information security management system certification project. It achieved accredited certification to the forerunner of ISO 27001, BS 7799. So first leap of faith, someone said, yeah, can you write a book on that? I mean, why the hell, really? Really? Anyway, someone did. The second leap of faith is after we'd written the book, it actually sold. Now, that for me is another biggie. So the book sold. We started getting questions and queries. What do you mean by this? Have you got a policy or a template we could use for that? And that's how IT governance come about as a business. So I've been involved with IT governance since then. I've been involved with information security management system standards since the mid to late 90s. Fast forward to now, I chair the UK committee for developing information security standards and standards around techniques for British Standards Institution as our national standards body. That mirrors the international committee, SC27, which is responsible for ISO 27001. So I'm heavily involved with that. I'm also contracted to UCAS as a technical assessor. So the certification bodies who go out and audit organisations like yours and mine and your clients to 27001, those certification bodies, they're observed and checked that they're using competent individuals and that they're allowing enough time and that they're doing a thorough job. And the way that check is performed is people like me go along and watch them and ask questions. So that's kind of why I'm here. Oh, book.
Yeah.
I was asked to nominate one book. So the last book I read that didn't have BS, EN or ISO in the title, or the last document I read that didn't have that in the title, was a book called The One. Heard about it on Radio 2 Book Club or something like that. I don't know, I wasn't really paying attention. But so they mentioned a couple of things and it caught my interest. I'm not a big one for reading fiction, but I thought, you know what, I'll give it a go. And I actually read it in 3 or 4 days, which, I don't know, it might have been a quiet period at work. But anyway. No, we don't know those. Honest. Right, that's me.
Thanks, Steve. Hi, everyone. Jeremy Aldous-Fountain. I'm the founder and chief bottle washer for a small IT services company down in the delights of Herefordshire, if anybody's ever been down that neck of the woods. Hexad Information Security Services has been going about 4 years now. We focus primarily on 2 legs of business. One is clearly cybersecurity, and the other is data protection. We offer everything from your general penetration testing and advisory work. We're also a DPO as a service organization with several companies both in the US and across Europe. And at the same time, we have consulting and tech teams that will operate primarily in the West Midlands, Wales and the Southwest. But we're a bronze partner with IT governance. And like everything, primarily focused on the SME sector, although I'm getting pulled in more and more into the larger game, which I was with for many years here in London and overseas. So yeah, look forward to the brickbats, as they say.
Thanks, Jerry. Hi, my name is Dennis Martin. I am the head of GRC consultancy at IT Governance. So I look after anything to do with management systems and privacy, GDPR, Data Protection Act. And mostly I get involved in implementations, in overseeing what we're doing on the field. I've worked on developing some of our training courses, delivered some of our training courses for large clients like Microsoft, and things like that. Before that, my background really is in security management and privacy management. I've worked with companies such as Transport for London, Deutsche Telekom, to work on their security management and work on their privacy. I was asked for a book. I wasn't aware that it was supposed to be light-hearted, so I've clearly got the nerdiest choice of the books here. My choice is Gödel, Escher, Bach, which was the book that got me into IT security and interested in IT in general. It's a book where the author Hofstadter basically takes the mathematician Gödel, and the illustrations by Escher, and the music of Bach, and sort of uses that to explain links and to explain systems and computing. Someone has summarized that it's a book for people who like to think about thinking, or something like that. So make of that what you will.
Thank you. My name is David Tuck. I'm an information security data protection practitioner for a company called Utilise PLC. We are a traditional managed services company. We've been around for about 20 years, 3 offices, Dundee, City of London, and Essex. And I guess my background is really in managed services, and so I've worked for companies like Unilever on the global outsourcing contract, Royal Institute of Chartered Surveyors, Allen & Overy, large companies like that. And I was thinking, what shall I do next? So I joined this small MSP because I thought I could never find an MSP that could actually give me the service that I wanted without smoke and mirrors. So I thought I'd join one. It's fair to say, because I'd worked in security on sometimes as part of those remits, they were starting to get much more security questions and coming their way. And they said, well, David, you know a bit about this, so you can deal with this. So it's fair to say that I suddenly found myself not being a managed services professional, but being an information security professional. And of course, GDPR came along, and everything came my way. So I'm the DPO for 2 of our companies, that's Utilise and Ignite Business Communications. And I also offer GDPR consultancy and information security consultancy to our clients, which is interesting. We'll talk a little bit more about that, I'm sure, later on. And I was asked a book. Now, I thought, now what can I give in terms of a book? Now, my inner geek came out a little bit here, I'm afraid. And because I've been around so long, and I could see some of you around here probably weren't even born when I started, which is scary for me. But I thought, well, who's my hero in the computing world? And I thought, well, a lot of people will know about Steve Jobs, but he's not really my hero. Then I thought Seymour Cray. Now, I don't know if anybody here actually knows who Seymour Cray is. Some of you might, some of the older ones. But Seymour Cray is the person who actually designed supercomputers, Cray 1 supercomputer, Cray 2. And for 20 years, he was the person who designed the fastest computers in the world. He actually set up Control Data Corporation, which was a large computer company, Cray Research, and he also designed the IBM 360, which was the first commercially available computer. So mainframe systems, he's a bit of a god. Now, the reason why I chose the book is because everybody knows who Steve Jobs is, but there was an interesting fact that came out of the book when I read it. When Steve Jobs designed the Mac computer, he used a Cray 1 supercomputer to design it. Now, just to give you some sort of idea, Seymour Cray, when he designed the Cray 1 supercomputer, bearing in mind it's the fastest computer in the world at the time, was on a pencil, a pad and paper. That's how he designed it. So I was lucky enough to work for them for 3 years, and I was lucky enough to meet him, and that's one of the highlights of my career. So I would recommend reading that book, because if you don't know anything about the history of computers, it will tell you a lot of how we got to where we are today. And that's it.
Thank you. What we're going to do today is we're going to have a bit of a discussion about ISO 27001 and GDPR, and then I've got a couple of set of questions, and then I'm hoping people in the crowd here are going to ask questions. If you need to know anything, please ask now. So first of all, my first question is, as account manager, especially at the run-up to GDPR, we would speak to a lot of customers, partners, talking about ISO 27001 and GDPR. And one of the questions that came is, getting an ISO 27001 certification, does this mean that I cannot be fined with GDPR? And with this question, I also want to say, if ISO 27000 is enough and you shouldn't be confined with GDPR, what else do you need to do beyond ISO 27001 to make sure that you are GDPR compliant? And I'm going to pass this question on to Dennis.
Okay. Thanks, Trace. Thank you very much for that. It's a good question, and as always, there's a short answer and there's a longer answer. The short answer is no, it doesn't mean that. If you are certified to ISO 27001, you can still be fined under GDPR. However, security, which is what ISO 27001 is all about, as we know, is a huge part and a very important part of GDPR compliance. It is just one part, but when we look back at enforcement action that has been taken in the past, most of it, according to the ICO, was based on a breach of the security principles. So security is a huge area. And what GDPR says is that you as an organization need to have adequate or appropriate security, appropriate to the risk that you pose to your data subjects. And that's where something like ISO 27001 can really help organizations show that they are taking this seriously, that they've got a risk-based approach to security. You can still get it wrong and you can still be fined, but this is really the best way that you have to show that you are indeed taking this seriously. The ICO has always said they're looking for commitment, not perfection, and doing this and doing it properly and actually living ISO 27001. And we all know that there is a huge difference between having the certificate and actually living it. If you really do it, if you really live it, then you are in a good position for the security part of GDPR to show that you're taking this seriously and that the steps that you're taking make sense, that they are measured and that they are appropriate to the risk.
Brilliant, thank you. Talking about ISO 27001, my colleague Em and I had a conversation with a customer, one of our partners, and one of their customers was looking to do a certification in ISO 27001, and you know, they were talking to us and they were talking to another business, and the subject came up about accredited and non-accredited, and we were trying to say, well, you know, as a business, we say you should use an accredited company to do it for you. Steve, what is your feedback on that? You know, should we get an accredited company to do it, or does it matter?
A lot of people get confused between the terms accreditation and certification, and then you put the two together, accredited certification, and we all get a little bit, you know, the head goes a bit light and you spin a bit, and no one really gives a monkeys, do they? Well, they should do, because there is a significant difference. So the audit bodies, and let's face it, most of us would recognise audit bodies such as BSI, LRQA, and there's a fair few others out there. The audit bodies come and audit organisations like ours to award a certificate of conformity to 27001. And a number of times this morning we've already talked about, does 27001 mean this, does 27001 mean that? The certificate actually reflects that your information security management system reflects the requirements of the standard. It doesn't mean you've got 27001. That's a standard, it's a document. You can buy that for 100 quid, roughly. I'm going off the topic, bear with me. So the audit body comes in and audits you or audits your information security management system to the requirements of the standard. They award a certificate. How do you know what that certificate's worth? That's the query, I guess, and that's where we come into this accreditation and accredited certification. So you're awarded a certificate by the audit body. How do you know it's worth anything? Well, if the audit body you've got it from is accredited, they're part of this worldwide network where the competence of their auditors is checked, the duration of audit time, their understanding and application of the standard and the requirements and related standards to 27001 are all checked. So we've got a known degree of consistency and a known degree of confidence in the certificate that's being awarded. Whereas if we go to an audit body that's not accredited as part of this worldwide recognised scheme, we don't necessarily know to what degree the auditor, the individual who's come in to see if we comply with those requirements, we don't know how competent they are. I can't say they're incompetent. They might be massively competent, but I've no means of understanding how competent they are. I don't know how the audit time's been determined. I don't know if the audit body has had to prove its independence, its impartiality, etc. So an unaccredited certificate, I don't know what weight to put on it. An accredited certificate, I've got an idea as to how much confidence I can associate with that if I know how to interpret the certificate, which is another challenge. Scope statement, statement of applicability, but we haven't got time for that now. We do training courses on that, funny enough. But anyway, sorry, I've got to get the sale in there somewhere. So yeah, accredited certification, and when I'm talking about an accredited certification, I mean accreditation issued by a national accreditation body such as UCAS. UCAS for the UK, INAB for Ireland. There's 70 plus, probably 80 plus national accreditation bodies now. How do you know it's a valid national accreditation body? They sign up to the International Accreditation Forum, and you can check on their website whether the national accreditation body is part of that framework or not. Hence, you get this global framework of accredited certificates where you know you can put a degree of confidence on the certificate you're being presented.
Brilliant. Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah, in a way, it's sort of linked to the first question as well. We are actually in the middle of a vacuum at the moment. There are no cases yet have been brought to the courts with regards to GDPR breaches. I think the first one who's going to be enacted is probably going to be British Airways with their August breach. As a result, a lot of what we talk about is, are we compliant, non-compliant? It's all about, do you necessarily have the technical and organizational standards in place to demonstrate and mitigate what you've put in and the measures that you've put in. A lot of this is yet to be tested in court, and I think we'll see first quarter, second quarter next year, some of those cases beginning to determine and become stated case against which we can measure it. Equally, as far as the EU is concerned, the Data Protection Board, they're only just now beginning to unpack certification. I was in Europe a couple of weeks ago, and the French are making a big play through their version of the Information Commissioner's Office, SEAL, to become that standard. So I think we're still a number of years away from something that's going to come out of the EU that says this is a certification for compliance. In the meantime, we've just got to get our act in order. And that's where, obviously, ISO 27000 is one of those organizational frameworks, governance frameworks, that are worth investing in and exploring. Because if you don't, ignorance is no excuse before the law. So again, it's on your toes, as British Airways, I think, will discover when they weld their way towards the courts in January.
Thank you. Next question is, IT security and information security one of the same things? We have a channel department because we have a lot of MSPs that have come. I'm going to ask this to David, so you can hand it over to David. A lot of MSPs have come to us because they need support with GDPR or ISO 27001, because a lot of businesses have gone to their MSP or their IT departments and said, we need to be GDPR compliant, we need ISO, it must be technical, so IT department needs to handle this. So a bit of feedback to, should it all be the IT department? Should it be a combined effort? Is it the same?
Interesting question. No, it's not the same. As I say, and we deal with a lot of organisations, and they all assume that GDPR is an IT issue, and it's not. IT security. We're talking about our more traditional things, such as your firewalls, your IT policies, how long your passwords were, all these things that you can implement to make your IT systems more secure. Now, no matter how much IT security you put in place, that is not going to make you or have put you in place information security. Information security is the whole organisation. It's about how your organisation treats the personal data. So it's about when the person in your accounts system or accounts department is sending an email out, are they making sure that that personal information they're sending is going to the right person? Do you have processes? Have you trained them? It's all that information security will come into the whole remit. So they are very different. Yes, you can put as much IT security as you want in place, but it doesn't necessarily mean you're going to be compliant or information security is going to be there. We actually recommend that organisations don't give it to their IT staff, because IT staff have a vested interest in, one, they like to put technology in place, so they'll always invest in the greatest and latest technology, and not necessarily the processes and controls that you need to have in place. who has access to what and for what reason. Why do they have access to it? All these things are part of information security, not IT. So I would say they are very, very separate, and it's a much bigger picture. IT security is part of information security, not the same.
Brilliant, thank you. Jeremy, yesterday we had a chat, and we were talking about ISO 27001 in SME businesses. You know, some smaller business don't feel it's necessary for them. They might find it's too expensive to implement. And you were talking about how you work with your customers, you know, your potentially small, medium-sized businesses, and, you know, how do you work with them, and what do you recommend that they do to implement an ISO in their company?
Yeah, I was quite taken with Alan's presentation just before we sat up here this morning, that cyber resilience model, that maturity model. I've got a range of clients that range from a couple of individuals right the way through to 700-800 person organizations. A lot of it is about maturity of the organization and the initial review of where they are within not only their IT security posture, but business continuity, disaster recovery, and as a business generally. There is still a lot of resistance, I sense, in the SME community, but it's based more or less around budgeting. They see it as an oil tanker. They deal with it in the same way as health and safety became a set of regulations that everybody did everything they could to step around it, hence the art of the weasel. It is more or less taking them back to ground level and giving them small digestible elements that they can measure success against. So Cyber Essentials is an ideal first on-ramp to a fuller migration to a tighter governance and compliance framework. But it does take a number of years. My oldest client is now 4.5 years. They will do ISO 27000 this year. But they've been Cyber Essentials Plus, ISMS, and now they're finally mature as an organization to be able to take that stance. And they're 24 people. But equally, it's been helped by the pricing coming down. ISO 27000, Steve kicked me, has come down considerably in implementation cost, but the maintaining of that still is a burden on organizations. And that's where we're seeing a lot of interest in us as a service, providing them ancillary backup to those teams. Instead of having to employ 6 people to do this on a full-time basis, they can hire it as per requirement. But I don't think the industry has yet sorted itself out about how we can get to that sweet spot. It's going to take several years still. If anyone else.
What do you think about that, Steve?
Which aspect?
How do we convince smaller businesses that you know, to take this on? You know, I think I think ISO 27001 a lot of times thinks it's for the bigger businesses. You know, how do we convince them?
Sure. Okay.
Do we say we only do like part of your business, or do you always recommend the whole business does it?
So is 27,000? Can't even say it. That's not good. Is 27,001 scalable? I guess is the query there. In my experience, I've helped a one-man band implement 27,001, and you know what? When he first phoned up and asked us, I want 27,001 certification, is what he meant to ask. He said he wanted 27,001, but that goes back to a point I've already made. So he wanted 27,001 certification, and I ended up filled in the call and kind of said, you're insane. You know, come back when you've grown a bit and you convince us that's what you actually need. That's what's going to save your business. And he talks about the position of his business and why customer data was so important, and protecting it and demonstrating they were serious about it was really important to the success of his business. And so I took it on personally, I set up an ISMS which was all contained in one Excel workbook. That was it. So it's tailoring the solution, the information security management system, to the needs of the organisation. And I guess he thought it was great, and all right, it's because we as a company understand 27001 and what can and doesn't work,
Yeah.
that meant we could come up with a solution that really worked for him.
Yeah.
And he thought it was he was pretty impressed with it, I've got to admit.
Yeah.
He got accredited certification. There's definitely a cost associated with that. That's
Yeah.
not cheap. The audit bodies are required to charge X many days for the initial audit, subject to the number of people in scope. You can't get much lower than one person in scope. And that comes around to the second part of your question, I think, which was, do you do part of an organisation or a whole organisation? Both are valid. Either way, the requirements for the audit bodies is that for any scope, the scope statement that goes on the certificate has to clarify the boundary of the ISMS. Yeah, you try and determine the boundary from some scope statements you see on accredited certificates. It can be a challenge. But when you do identify the boundary, the requirement is that the audit body confirms that risks associated with that boundary have been considered and addressed. So if it's part of an organisation, it should still give you a degree of assurance with regards to the security arrangements around information within that scope.
Okay.
So a scalable solution should be appropriate. And the standard says right from the outset that the detail in an ISMS is appropriate to the organisation that needs to implement it. And that's why the standard, the ISO, in fact, any ISO management system standard, is written in such generic terms that actually it can be a bit of a challenge to apply it to any one organisation.
Okay. So basically what you're saying is all businesses can have this done, from your one-man band to huge companies, and we should encourage all size companies to, obviously, if they can afford it, to implement it.
I would say that, wouldn't I? One other thing I will also say, when people start embarking on an information security management system project, it's so much, everyone thinks it's all about the certification. And Alan made the point in his in the resilience model thing that certification is actually a relatively early stage of maturity for an information security management system. So everyone designs it with certification in mind, but they forget about the fact that actually they've got to maintain it. So designing the information security management system in a manner whereby it's easy to maintain and not expensive to maintain is critical, and that's where I see lots of organisations trip up and fall over, sadly.
And I remember my training that they do say they can, when people come and audit, they can see that the companies who have implemented it and then have just left it, and then suddenly they're going to be audited again, and they all run around like headless chickens.
You've
and
got
they
time
can
for
say,
a quick anecdote. There's one of the clients we had in the early days of IT governance. The information security person who looks after their ISMS, she was their quality manager actually. It got to the stage, they got certification, it was great, they was happy. Once a year, my phone would ring, and it would always be just after Friday lunchtime, the last Friday of September. And it was always this same, it was Carol. It was always Carol phoning me up. And I had a Carol checklist that I only took with me on that Friday. And it's because their audit body came in October, so they had their management review the last Friday of September, and that was the first time they looked at it, and they hadn't been doing any of the ISMS hygiene factors. They hadn't been doing internal audit, they hadn't refreshed their risk assessment, they hadn't done staff awareness, etc., etc., etc. So I had my Carol checklist. And she'd phone up and she'd go, "Hello, Steve, it's been a while." "Yes, Carol, it's about a year, isn't it?" "Oh, yeah, it'll be about that, yeah. Go on, blah, blah, blah." And I kind of fell into that I guess, maybe car mechanic type mode. She'd go, "How much would charge you for that?" Oh, and every year I kept putting it up because I didn't want the auditors, when they go into an organisation to conduct an audit, they can tell if that organisation has been using a consultancy practice to advise them on maintaining their ISMS. There's traits that give it away, whether it's certain wording in the scope statement, a particular nuance in the information security risk assessment, or what the internal audit programme structure looks like. There's things that give it away. And I didn't want the audit body going into Carol's organisation, and I'm carefully trying not to name them, I didn't want them to think, "Oh, hang on, it's IT governance. They've helped them just scrape that bar again." And the problem is, with Carol's organisation, of course, the resource profile to maintain the ISMS, well, they weren't maintaining it, to get it to scrape the bar at every annual audit in this case, they wouldn't do anything, and then, in order to get over the bar, come the audit, it was damned expensive in a really short period. And then they wouldn't do anything again. They took an ISMS holiday. Nightmare.
Yeah.
Sorry, I've gone off
No,
topic a bit, but hey, there
absolutely
you go.
fine.
Yeah, so designing ISMS with maintenance in mind, not necessarily the first certification audit, would be my the learning point from that.
Brilliant.
Sharp now.
Dennis, I'm going to ask a question about Brexit. Bit of a topic that you're probably seeing on the news quite a bit. How would GDPR affect those outside the European Union? For example, Brexit coming up, will this change United Kingdom's obligations with data, not just in Europe, America, all around the world? How is it going to affect?
Yeah, thank you. So as you can probably guess, with all the extreme certainty around the Brexit process, we know, of course, for sure how that's going to affect things. We don't. What we do know is that in the draft withdrawal agreements that we've seen, what they say is that at least for the transition period, the UK will continue to apply European data protection law and be bound by it. So that there will be no immediate change for companies in the UK in terms of who they can share data with, whether people in Europe can share data, and so on. The current thinking is that any final agreement would have a provision that would get the UK to a point where the rights that people have before Brexit wouldn't be affected by Brexit. So that means that if a UK company currently processes data of French nationals, for example, which fall under GDPR, of course, then they would need to treat that data with the same duty of care after Brexit has happened. And the one thing that could supersede that is if we do go for an adequacy finding. So what we are trying to do, and what everyone expects the UK to do, is try and get an adequacy finding to say that data is going to be as protected in the UK as it would be in any European country, and that would then supersede this sort of GDPR bubble arrangement where the UK is still within the GDPR bubble but outside the regulatory mechanism. What it does look like, though, when we talk about the regulatory mechanism, is that the one bit that won't apply is Chapter 7 of GDPR, which is the consistency mechanisms. The UK is very likely not to be part of the EDPB, the European Data Protection Board, and very likely not to be part of this one-stop shop system, which does mean for organizations, and again, this is just what we currently sort of see in our crystal ball, but it very likely will mean for organizations that if you have a data breach in a number of your European dependencies, that you will need to deal with both the UK supervisory authority and the European supervisory authorities, because there is not going to be this one-stop shop mechanism with the ICO and the other European supervisory authorities. So that's something that we need to watch out for, and we need to see how that develops. Another area where there is even more uncertainty around is how we deal with companies in the UK that process data outside the UK. And I haven't seen any definitive statement on how that is going to be handled after Brexit. So there is some uncertainty. However, in most cases, the rules will just continue to apply, and any organization that applies GDPR rules, applies DPA 2018 rules, is very likely to not have grave problems with their data processing in the short term. What happens in the medium term is anyone's guess.
Jeremy, you mentioned yesterday you deal with some US clients, and they were asking you questions about this. You know, what do you get from your US customers, and how are you advising them?
Yeah, we're straddled across a fence at the moment. We've got a representative service for a number of US firms. So Hexad represents them for the ICO here in the EU. Binding corporate rules and standard clauses appear to be the approach that the EU will find satisfactory for a lot of international organizations that are processing EU data stateside. For those with US clients, please make sure that they've got Privacy Harbor, Privacy Shield in place. I'm astounded by the amount of latitude that is allowed by the US, despite copper coming in recently in California around data protection. So standard clauses are an acknowledged way forward, so are binding corporate rules, but they're very expensive. We've got this transition period, December 2020, which may or may not be extended. The US, it's kind of in two camps, depending on who you talk to. One is it's something that the socialist Europeans are doing, and we don't do that in America. Yay. And then the other side who do want to engage very dynamically. One client I have has 26 European language websites. They're all hosted in the US, but they also gain Indian subcontinent, Russia. So there's a vast amount of, when you analyze the data flows and the IP addresses, it's astounding how much is still inside the EU that is being transposed into the US, into so-called safe environments. Getting those cats in a bag around a table to organize a contractual arrangement is quite interesting, and we're sort of 4 months into that process now. But we're not the same. I've got a South African client doing the same thing. So again, we've got a Maltese client, we've got one in Cyprus. What's going to happen with them in the gambling area is another big area as these companies move operations around the world for tax purposes. So it's a very fluid and dynamic environment. We've got till December 2020. So I'm not breaking sweat at this point, but keeping a close eye on it. Yeah.
Okay, brilliant. I'm going to open the floor up. So if anyone's got any questions for any of our panel, please ask now. And don't be shy. Let me take a microphone. Hold on. Let me take one of the microphones.
Hi. So I myself wear many hats. I'm a GDPR practitioner, DPO for our organisation, cybersecurity specialist and information security manager. One of the words I hate most is compliance and compliancy. Can you define compliancy? Because it's my interpretation of the GDPR that it is a framework that you work towards in order to become GDPR compliant, but there is no such thing as GDPR compliancy. Is that correct, or is there a definition of compliancy?
Yeah, I agree with you. I mean, currently you cannot be compliant to GDPR. There's no standard for GDPR, so you can't be compliant to it. GDPR talks about accountability, so it's about demonstrating that you're accountable. So you've got the processes, you're following them, you're doing your risk analysis, you're doing your DPIA, you have the evidence of your SARS, et cetera, et cetera. That's not compliant. It's showing that you're actually doing what the law says you should be doing and you are being accountable. I agree. There is no compliance to GDPR at the moment. There is no standard where you can say, we do all this, we tick those boxes. And that is an issue. To give you some idea, I have 600 companies. We're a data processor for all of them. 70 of them have spoken to me about our compliancy to GDPR. Now, it would be great if I could say, yeah, I've got an ISO 27462 certificate, so on that day when I was audited, we were compliant. But I can't. All I can say is we have all the processes in place. You're welcome to look at it. You're welcome to look at our logs. You're welcome to look at the processes we're following. And I think that shows that we are accountable under GDPR and we're doing the right thing. So, yeah.
That's great. Thank you.
Yeah.
On the same subject, so accredited certification to a management system standard is about your processes, so it's not compliance with any law, it's a conformity assessment against a published standard. Information security, 27001, we'd probably all like to think we know what that covers. I guarantee there's very few of us in the room that do, sorry, but hey, I'll have a discussion with you over lunch if you want to probe how far you think you might understand it, and you'll probably correct me. There you go. On privacy, there is a British standard for privacy information management system, BS 10012. There is an international standard in development that will be a bolt-on to 27001 for privacy, ISO 27552. And sorry, it's a bit like telephone numbers, but bear with me. You know, I've got to roll them out when I know them. But accredited certification to any management system standard is never going to be a means of demonstrating compliance with any legislation. It's a degree of assurance as to how you commit to and manage a topic. the GDPR regs, and the guys here on the stage probably can quote this better than me, there's a standard referenced for a certification scheme in GDPR regs, which I believe is the ISO 17064 or 65, one or the other, which is a different accreditation framework to that applies for accredited certification for management systems, which is 17021. 17021 covers 9001, 14001, 27001, that sort of thing, and it's all about management system and a degree of confidence or assurance. The 17065 scheme, when something comes out, it is likely to have a very, very different cost profile for any organisation that wants a certificate saying it conformed on a certain date. It's much more likely to be a snapshot on a single date, and that's where you were. I think the interest in, certainly in the standards community and the development of ISO 27552 suggests to me that it's going to get a lot more traction than any sort of compliance regime as opposed to conformity regime under ISO 17064, I think it is. It might be 17065. Yeah, so compliance, no. Conformity, kind of.
Yeah, I think the compliance question, it's the law. Yeah, we keep talking about GDPR as just this kind of nebulous thing that floats around. It's law, whether it's the Data Protection Act 2018 or the EU directive that's now become EU standard. That's yet to be tested in court, as we said earlier. But the precursor to that is happening under our feet as we talk now. And we talk a lot about GDPR, but anybody had issues with PICA? Personal Electronic Communication Regulations, the beast. A lot of my clients are finding their arse being burnt around that legislation far more, and that's their first kind of rocking up against GDPR as they mature. 741 cases that the ICO's taken to court in the last 3 months. The majority of them are PICA, and they are whacking them out. They've got a very good, they've invested in some very good teams. So clients are seeing marketing as being the ugly sister. They're the ones who are incurring the wrath of the ICO now, and in doing so, it's like the canary in a coal mine. They are not putting in place the necessary just to cover off PICA, which will become the e-privacy standard across Europe in early part of next year. So compliance will be tested by the courts, ultimately. And then we're back to the ignorance is no excuse discussion. So having the framework and so you can demonstrate becomes the mitigation to that.
Steve, you mentioned the BS 10012. Why are we asking a lot about ISO 27001 and not the standard for privacy management, which is the BS 10012, when privacy management goes well beyond information security? Why are we not pushing that
It's the
one?
title of the session, isn't it? Sorry, no, hang on. That's not the right answer, is it? So BS 10012, first off, it's a British standard. It doesn't get a lot of traction outside the UK. It's debatable whether it's got a lot of traction in the UK. There's not an accredited certification scheme around 10012. There's an unaccredited option. However, you can use ISO 27001 to get an accredited certificate that references BS 10012. Very few organisations have done that yet. I suspect they'll be waiting for the 27552 to come out. Coming back round to what you were saying about while we talk about information security, and this kind of harks back to a rather kind of flippant comment I made last time I had this thing in my hand, about information security. As far as 27001 is concerned, we probably can all say, yeah, confidentiality, integrity, availability. What about the other aspects? Anyone care to name some of them? I mean, normally someone says non-repudiation, because none of us really get that. And there's 5 or 6 other words associated with information security according to 27001. By the time you actually look at the definitions of those terms themselves, such as confidentiality and availability, the definition of confidentiality includes people, entities, and processes. So making sure that information doesn't get into the wrong processes. Well, hey, hang on. I can see some parallels here with some of the privacy issues. Availability, on demand by an authorised entity, and by the time you start managing those things and integrity, you get on to, and with some of the other things like non-repudiation, authentication, etc., you get into issues around timeliness, how long can you hold information for, when you shouldn't hold it for. So the breadth of information security as per 27001 stretches a lot further than most people would assume. Unless, of course, you're that one-man band where we designed an ISMS in one workbook, which was nice and simple for him.
Cool. Any other questions? No, I've got two. There we go.
So it was interesting that you mentioned PECA. I say PECA, sorry. Don't you think that GDPR and PECA go hand in hand, especially if you've got customer-facing websites? Because essentially cookies, marketing options, they're the base of where you get your information. So making sure you have that right means that you can then apply GDPR to it.
Yeah, it's a good observation. I think it's the first point that a lot of general Joe public is going to come up against any organisation, and ultimately, in the midst of all this navel-gazing around standards and other bits and bobs here, we forget about the data subject rights. And what's been I've got two cases at the moment where clients had 24 DSARs in the space of about 48 hours, different types of DSARs, be forgotten, portability, all that good stuff. And then you track back where it's come from, a single IP address. And behind that IP address, somewhere in Darlington, is a legal firm who are now representing aggrieved data subjects. We refer to this as the sort of PPI Mark II. There are firms now that are beginning to equip themselves, knowing that many organizations don't have the general basics in place, to wit, they can now start to get some leverage. Combined with, obviously, and another colleague of mine has come across a criminal activity where a similar thing is happening. Pay us 20,000, we'll go away. So a lot of organizations will come up against it. The tripwire will be PICA, because that's typically where Joe Public will first interact with an organization: email, telephone, cookies, whatever. I do, and I'm sure other companies do, snap audits. The jigsaw puzzle discussion, it's great, you've got 4 pieces, but you need 36 if you are to be able to represent yourself in court. And many firms are lulled into this false sense. We're in a dip period now around GDPR compliance. Most people have 25th of May, done, don't have to worry about that for another year. The fact is, around them are happening PICA incidents, data subject access requests, and they will be the tripwires that the ICO will act on in earlier of next year. But yeah, PICA definitely is an underrated thorn.
Brilliant. Okay, we've got time for one more question, okay. And then it's lunchtime. Okay.
We talked about the fact that, or everyone's alluded to the fact that sometimes it's difficult getting traction from clients to engage with this. How do you think the ICO play a part in that? In that they send out mixed messages and messages of leniency?
Cheers. Who would like to answer that? There we go.
Good question. The ICO is in a difficult position because we have the situation at the moment in the UK and all over Europe that we don't really know what compliance looks like, as we discussed, and that there are certain things that it's very difficult for people to comply with. One example being the DPO. The DPO is supposed to be an expert in their field. They are supposed to have expert knowledge, a lot of experience in data protection. I don't know the numbers out of my head, but there's a vastly larger number of DPO posts that need to be filled than people actually qualified to fill that role. So there is even no way to comply with the entire regulation. So the ICO can take a very strong stance, or could take a very strong stance, and say anyone who's not compliant, we'll go after them with the baseball bat. What they're saying is, well, we recognize what the situation is like, and we want commitment, not perfection, is what they always say. the challenge with it, and I agree with you, that does mean that for some organizations that sense of urgency disappears. However, I think even showing commitment to GDPR goes beyond just saying, yeah, we think it's really important. We've got this strategy statement that says we will address GDPR and that's it. Even to show commitment with GDPR, you need to implement processes, you need to implement technical solutions to be able to respond to data subject access requests or other rights requests, to be able to show that you are taking your accountability seriously. So I think they don't necessarily do us a favor by their wording, but if we take this and explain to clients that actually, yes, they say, you know, you don't need to be perfect, but do you really think that your current situation as an organization is between sort of being almost there and absolute perfection? The reality is that most companies aren't even close to being almost there. So they really can't show commitment by just saying, yeah, we look at this in a year or in half a year. If we make that point to them and say, well, yes, but we can help you show commitment, then we can use that to our advantage, that messaging, if that makes sense.